Emotions after arriving back in the UK. Paul Penn-Farthing landed at Heathrow Airport yesterday morning. His charity confirmed he and his animals left the country on Saturday without his staff. Well, Dominic Dyer is a wildlife protection and animal welfare campaign. He's also a friend of Penn-Farthing's. And I'm just wondering, having had 24 hours to see what sort of reaction there's been, and that phrase, animals before people, what does Penn think of that?
I think he's very tired and probably hasn't had a chance to take in what's been going on, really, which is a sort of Ministry of Defence smokescreen operation to distract attention from the disastrous retreat from Afghanistan and make it about a pets before people story, which is a sad ending to something that really was about a humanitarian mission. You know, I got involved with Penn because I've known him a long time, a huge respect for the work of that charity, but it was the vet nurses and vets, particularly the young women vet nurses and vets, that drove me to campaign to get them out and their dependents of that country. Of course, the dogs were to come with them, but this was really about people. And we worked very hard across Foreign Office with the Prime Minister, the Home Office and DEFRA to actually put this whole project together in record time with huge, huge public support. And I think we've probably become a victim of our own success, really. It became one of the most successful operations ever undertaken in terms of campaigning. And, you know, the Prime Minister intervened directly with the Home Secretary to get the 68 people on a right of entry to the UK list. And people might say to us, why were your people any more important than translators or other people? I can't take those moral decisions. All I can say is that we focused with huge support, for example, from the Royal College of Veterinary Surgeons, the British Veterinary Association, huge numbers of MPs and ministers, to actually say that there were jobs for these people, there was support for them in the UK. We wanted to rescue the animal rescuers and bring them here. And that caught the imagination of the British people at a time of utter tragedy and desperation in Afghanistan, where particularly veterans who contact me in large numbers do say that they are so ashamed of what Britain and America has done to leave that country in the way it is. So, you know, this was about people. It wasn't about animals. And the Ministry of Defence never wanted this operation to complete. The leak of that voicemail message from a political aide, that's where I believe it's come from. He'll deny it probably, but it's there in the Sunday Times, is really an attempt to diminish the character of one of the bravest, most courageous men I've ever met. It won't work. You know, I was on with Rachel Johnson last night on LBC, and she was trying to push this Pets Before People's agenda. And I said, well, you better ask your brother, because he was the one that got behind this project. He was the one that implemented the decisions at the highest level. And it was him that forced Wallace to do the U-turn to let the animals, people into the airport. He never forgave Wallace. His reactions to me on television, quite frankly, have been appalling. His language has been appalling, and his political aid has been out of control. When the truth comes out, and it will, because there'll be books and films made about this, I think this will be very damaging to what the Ministry of Defence done. And my final point on that, before you pick up on it, you might say, did it matter that the Ministry of Defence did what they did? It had, because it delayed the flight authorization into Kabul. And I spent a lot of my time working with a very wealthy investor in New York, Spencer Aber, who came up with a large amount of money to get an aircraft. And believe me, we spent days going around trying to find aircraft that could get into Kabul. But because the Ministry of Defence wouldn't give us a flight authorization to land, we couldn't get it. And that basically delayed the operation, which inevitably led to this change of American visa rules, which basically let the Taliban to say to Penn, when he made his last attempt to get into that airport, that he couldn't take his people in. I will never forgive the Ministry of Defence for that. I'll never forgive the Secretary of State and his aides for what they've done. They can live with their consciences, but if those people didn't come out, I'll lay the blame at their door.
Good morning. Yeah, I mean, it's such a difficult situation. It really is. Just want to firstly, mention that it was, Carrie Johnson, Boris's wife, wasn't it? Who was very important. As a huge animal lover. She was, pivotal to this, really.
Well, you know, I know Carrie well, and I've campaigned with her. And I'm not going to say I didn't tell her what was going on at certain stages. I wasn't in contact with her telling me what she thought about this. Other people were telling her what was going on. I know the way she thinks. I think she's a genuine animal lover. And I think she's an asset to the Prime Minister in Downing Street. I think she would have been horrified by the thought of those vets and vet nurses being left to the Taliban. And I think she thought if we could raise the money and get the plane, and the wealthy investor who's very well known to this government contacted Downing Street and laid out the case for what we were doing in New York with him. So everyone knew what we were doing here. We had full support for the Foreign Office, DEFRA working on all the veterinary side. You know, George Eustice was brilliant. I have my differences with George Eustice, as you know, on many issues, but on this he was wonderful. So I don't understand what Wallace was trying to do. It was a sort of back channel delay operation with a political advisor making calls to Penn-Farthing in Afghanistan. You listen to that voicemail message. I'd spoken to that aide an hour before and I'd torn a strip off him, not with any expletive language, but I said I held him directly to account for delays of that flight authorization, for him going around Whitehall trying to undermine this operation with ministers at a critical stage that could affect people's lives. He knew what I felt. And then when Penn rang him and left that, very, very emotional message with him, that's the context to it. You can understand these were life and death decisions with a man that was becoming the voice of Kabul to the world about what was a massively deteriorating security situation on the ground.
I mean, obviously, emotions are running high on this, but I need to put to you that Ben Wallace has said repeatedly, no one blocked flights, an allegation you've made this morning, and he's branded the comments that you made as an insult to the men and women who've just carried out the most extraordinary evacuation. Does he have a point?
I've never, ever insulted our armed services. Penn is one of the most respected. You know, I had a plane, we were going to leave Luton, I could have filled with ex-military that would have come and helped us get those animals and people off that runway. And we'd have all risked our lives to do it. We were stopped at the last minute. So let not Mr. Wallace say that for a moment. That is disgraceful. Mr. Wallace went into radio stations and said that we were basically talking bollocks. That's not the sort of language that a Secretary of State should be using. His political aide was out trying to diminish our reputation. Yet we were engaged at the highest level with ministers. This was absolutely ridiculous going on. I've never insulted the troops. I have huge respect for what they were doing in the most difficult, dangerous circumstances in an operation that quite honestly was tragically being run by the British and American administrations and never needed to happen this way. You know, the fact is that we had to put dogs on an aeroplane without people is a question that everyone should be asking. How did we get to the point when that plane was sat on that runway? We were in contact with Dominic Raab's office and we were begging him to let someone get on that plane. You know the response we were getting? We don't have anyone in this airport we can put on that plane. We have more air capacity than people. But over on the other wall, we had hundreds, thousands of people in sewage waiting to get blown up by suicide bombers who've been there for days with their children in the most disgusting conditions. You've seen it. You know what's going on there. So this whole operation has been appallingly handled. What happened at the end is that Penn got access to the airport because the Taliban let him in with these dogs. His people in Kabul said, listen, go, Penn. We've tried 2 times to go to that gate. It's extremely dangerous. They're not going to let us through. These are women and children and elderly people as well as the young staff. It was heartbreaking for them. But they said, if you don't leave us, we'll become a target for the Taliban. They'll come and kill all the dogs anyway. They don't agree with companion dogs, so they'll kill them all. Go now. And you're so high profile that if you don't go now, you're actually causing us more danger. That's the most difficult decision he took. It was the Taliban that led him into that airport. The MOD did nothing. I had the flight authorizations because the Air Commodore's office had contacted me. We had the plane ready in Karachi to get down on the ground. But one other thing I will say that really worried me, we had huge security concerns about the aircraft. The operator said if anyone in the media knew about its flight path or when it was coming in, the pilots would not fly in for obvious reasons. It was a very, very dangerous. And the Ministry of Defense put out a tweet on their press office Twitter feed saying that Penn was in the airport. They'd unloaded the cargo and they were waiting for his plane. And not only that, then they started to inform the defense correspondent of the Daily Telegraph of the movements of that aircraft. Now, someone has to explain what the Ministry of Defense were doing because they were endangering the life of everyone on that plane, including the flight crew, Penn, and of course the animals we were carrying out. And one final point. By the time he was in the airport, the only thing the troops were doing was smashing up vehicles. I'm so grateful some American troops came with hoses and sprayed down the dogs. Otherwise, they would have died of dehydration. And what was Penn to do? Was he take his gun and shoot every one of those dogs just for the sake of saying he wouldn't take them out? And the £500,000 that Spencer Aber had got the plane in, the flight crew that had risked their lives to get on the ground, of course, all he could do in the end was get on that plane, take the dogs back. All the dogs and cats are safe. He's safe. And I've been crying for the people we've left behind. And we will work tirelessly to get those vets and vet nurses and dependents out. Whatever we have to do, we'll get them out, and that will be the end of this story. But I'll never forgive Mr. Wallace. I'll never forgive his aides or the ministers that have been putting out these horrible, horrible allegations about the character of one of the most bravest, courageous men I have ever had the privilege to work with.
And the key thing here that we must always, make clear is no human beings were compromised by this. You getting the animals here. I mean, the staff didn't get here.
No, they weren't. And we've got hundreds of people want those animals. Those Nowzad dogs will be stars. I've got huge numbers of servicemen. Every one of those animals will be loved and cared for. But you know what? We wanted the people too. And the government wanted the people too. And the Prime Minister wanted the people. At one point, he was even talking about using our aircraft to bring aid into the airport for people that were in the airport without sanitary products, without food and water, because they weren't even being fed while they were waiting in there. So this idea that this was a rogue operation, that the idea that I was insulting people as some bod on Good Morning Britain who couldn't even remember my name was saying that probably Wallace had put out this morning is quite disgraceful. I'm working at the highest levels of government. And if Carrie did speak to Boris, I'm hugely grateful. But ultimately, Boris dragged in the Secretary of State because he was acting very foolishly, making allegations that he couldn't support, and actually trying to undermine a policy that we'd worked across government to undertake. Operation Art will be a film. It will be a book. The Hollywood director's already going to make
Dominic,
this film. And then when it does come out, it'll be a very interesting story about what went wrong in Whitehall as well as in Kabul.
And
we're out of time, but really good to see you, Dominic. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. The point is up next. That's it from us. We'll see you tomorrow.
See you then.